Let's kick off. So today's session is called Marketing's High Stakes Moment, Reinvent or Be Replaced. And it sounds a little bit alarmist for those of us in the sales and marketing world. And as a recovering sales and marketing executive, we tend to live alarm to alarm to alarm. Every generation of sales and marketing, we have something. But this is different. And we're seeing very, very different challenges. We're seeing technology challenges. We're seeing political challenges just across the board. In many of our SAMI sessions, we focused on some of the emerging technologies. Obviously, one can't ignore the AI beast in the room, and we've had a lot of sessions on that. And we've covered, the usual stuff about, SDRs and BDR performance and making marketing more efficient. But they tend to be improving things that already exist. So when we looked around, and I got introduced a while back to Dom Colasante, who's the CEO of 2X, he was speaking a different language. And it was fascinating to me because he was taking a very, very different approach because we all seem to be doing the same thing as much as we try not to. And Dom's like, no, no, we've got to look at this entirely differently. And the firm that he's built is, I think, a fine example of that. So as we look through the concept of rebuilding marketing or the different approach, and by the way, this isn't just for marketers. I analyze a lot of companies, and I see a lot of marketing issues that aren't related to marketing. And Dom's going to cover some of this. It could be a leadership issue. And for those of us who are sales executives, stop blaming marketing because you may be marketing's problem. But we're going to look at things differently, and Dom's going to take that approach. So throughout the session today, drop your questions in the chat. We try to get all the questions, or we'll group them, and I'll be interacting with Dom. He'll be interacting with Dom as we go through the session. So without further ado, Dom, the challenge here is going to be how do we think differently, and also the motivation for what you've done. So I know you're still on mute, but I would love you to introduce yourself and take over the session and wow us, my friend.
High bar. I will do my best. If I give you one idea you didn't have and leave you better than I found you, that's my goal for today. So just a quick introduction to give you a frame of reference of where my point of view comes from. I'm a marketer by background. Spent my whole career in the B2B marketing space. Started in field marketing at a company called SAP. Spent a little deviation of that into marketing ops. Ran events for a bit. Spent some time in product marketing. Then was doing what we called strategic account marketing at the time, which was really ABM before ABM was a word. Found myself into a RevOps job before that was really the main field. We called sales and marketing operations at that point, and then was a CMO. And I think now I'm sort of a CEO trapped in a CMO's kind of body. I don't think you ever stop being a CMO, even if you make that CEO transition. But my background comes from being a marketer and really working in the field and in the organization. And I'll tell you a bit about the business we've built. But the concept we've looked at is, and I had this problem when I was a CMO, that we're innovating on so many different things, on the tech stack, on the program spend. We're not always innovating on the operating model, the people, the headcount, where half or more of our budget goes. And I had that problem as a CMO and thought might be a different way to solve that. And so that led me to create a company called 2X. 2X has become the leader in go-to-market subscription services. We pioneered a thing called marketing as a service. We're sort of the category creator of that. The business has been around for 7 years. We've grown about 100% per year over those 7 years. And now I'm privileged to lead a team of about 1,500 marketers globally, helping companies of all sizes in the B2B spectrum innovate on how they do their craft and how marketing contributes value to the business. So I'm going to tell you a bit about sort of the problems I saw 8 years ago when I founded the firm and I was a CMO. That unfortunately are still the same problems today that we're all facing, and a bit about a different way, as Rob mentioned, how to think about it and how to navigate that challenge. So this is the singular issue that I had 8 years ago, and I would postulate it might be the singular issue most of us have today, which is what we call the marketing resource paradox. That No matter how good things are, we never have enough resources. Whether a resource is a person or a dollar of budget or time or a capability or a skill, we're always resource constrained. But then at the same time, if you talk to our stakeholders in the business, the sales department, the CEO, the board, the finance organization, you're going to hear their view that we're impact constrained. We're not producing enough ROI, revenue, pipeline, engagement. Pick your metric that is a form of output. And so we're in this situation where we don't feel like we're doing enough of either of these. But you kind of need one to get the other, right? You need resources to get impact and impact to justify resources. There's chicken and egg problem. But then we're also in this situation where every year it feels like we're getting less resources and being asked to deliver more impact. And I think that becomes an unsolvable problem. It becomes a physics problem. It becomes a math problem. It doesn't work. You can't keep reducing resources and expecting more impact in this sort of incremental, well, we'll trim this little thing, or we'll cut this open headcount, or we'll, move this agency around, or we'll shift some budget from this to this. It doesn't work anymore. And it didn't work for a long time. And I think the temperature of this problem has gotten to a level where it's sort of impossible for us to deliver on the expectations that we have as marketers. And I think it's impossible to do that unless we think transformationally. But this problem, I imagine, resonates as an issue we all have. And there's a couple other issues around that. So we have this budget pressure physics problem, if we call it that, around do more with less. We all know the research that's being put out there that says either budgets are going to be flat or down. It seems like that is every year. It's the same report from some different firm, Gartner, Forrester, IDC, somebody. Budgets are flat, budgets are down. Even when they're up, I don't really see them go up. I don't know who is responding to the survey saying they're up, but someone is. I think it's maybe a high growth business that's investing in marketing for the first time, and that's pulling the skew in the results. But it feels like budgets are always in an austere mode, especially over the last 5-6 years. Maybe 2021 was a good year for budgets, but that was only because of what happened in 2020. We also know that there's a really significant program and headcount imbalance. All of the cutting that's happened, all the austerity that's happened, have caused us to pull back on program spend. And so now we're in this situation where our program budgets can be, 40% of our budget. We all know program is what drives the results, right? That's the ads, that's the events, that's the campaigns, that's the sponsored activities that produce the pipeline, the engagement, the ROI, and the revenue. And so we're out of balance there. And that's the easiest thing to turn off, right? Or the easiest thing that the CFO goes after when it's time to cut budget, because it doesn't require moving headcount. It's sort of fungible. It's not committed in a lot of ways. That's a problem. And we know that issue really impedes our ability to be successful. The second one is we've been sold a bag of goods that Martech is going to change our lives as marketers. And I don't think that bag of goods was actually sold, improperly. I think Martech's amazing. It does all the things that the tech provider says that it does, largely. But I think what we haven't realized is the full impact and the value of that in our departments. I think there's a couple of reasons why. First is Gartner tracks utilization. This is sort of a spooky stat, right? That this is a little old, but I imagine it's continued. I have not seen an updated stat on this, which is maybe also telling that it hasn't been refreshed. The percentage of Martech that's been deployed that's actually being used in the way that it was intended was running about 33% a couple of years ago, down from 58% a few years before that. That's awful when we look at how much we spend on it and how much we commit to Martech, RevTech, solving the problems of efficiency and scale and impact and all those modernized things that we wanted to do. I think the big reason for that is buying technology alone is not enough to deliver the value that the technology promises. There's a lot of other things required around that. There's people, there's skills, there's time, there's integration, there's implementation, there's change management. There's all these things that go along with the tech investment that often aren't talked about in the business case. It's if you just spend this couple $100,000 and you deploy this thing, you'll get this amazing result. And that is often not what happens in reality. AI, in my view, is another version of that. I think AI has tremendous potential. I think it can do the things that people are saying it can do. But I think just like technology, it requires skills and people and integration and expertise and capability, and all of those things need to go along with it. So just buying the tech alone, or even just using the tech alone, isn't enough to really deliver that impact. And I think back to that paradox problem, there's a view that we just put tech in there, it'll solve the problem. And I actually think tech is making it worse because now you're spending even less money on program budget and more on tech, which is not delivering more of the ROI that we expect it would.
Hey, Dom, quick question on this topic. We had Scott Brinker on last year, and for those of us who followed Scott Brinker, it's the marketing. Remember the chart initially of the Martech stuff. It
Yeah.
was this big and it was this big, and then all of a sudden it's on. And even Scott admits it's like it's unthinkable. And you talked about the drop in adoption, and I know you'll be getting to this, but one of the reasons, and I'd love your opinion on this, is we have all this new MarTech, but the marketing organization to actually integrate the technology, adopt it, hasn't necessarily changed. Do you think that impacts the ability to even get MarTech in? If we have the same team that doesn't have the skills to integrate, what's your take on that?
Yeah. We didn't talk about this beforehand. I have a Brinker slide in my deck. I'm just gonna jump to it.
Ah,
This is this is my view of that problem. It's a Brinker slide from 2016, and it's still true today. On the left, you have organizations change at a logarithmic rate, meaning slow, meaning all of us. Technology changes at an exponential rate, fast, and that creates this gap that widens as technology gets advanced and people don't move with technology. That is not a deficiency of all of us. That is just a fact of how fast technology is moving. This is in 2016. So this is kind of like before the ABM and the intent data wave. This is before the AI wave for sure. And yet, I think it couldn't be more true today. His view, which I tend to agree with, is the only way to solve this imbalance is to go through a reset mode where you bring the organization back up to the level of technological competency. But by the way, by doing that, that means you're going to have to do it again in a couple of years. And the people model just can't keep up with the pace of change. And so I think that points at that the concept of a big organization of lots of internal headcount and lots of people is fundamentally misaligned from what you need to get value out of technology. So you have to have a different model. You can't just hire a bunch of people, deploy them all. Even if today, if you went and recruited like the most AI savvy marketing team that understands all the new tech, in a couple of years, they're going to be just as outdated as our current teams are. Because the pace of which is changing so fast, and there's a very small percentage of people and a very small percentage of companies that are even able to keep up with bleeding edge all the time. It's exhausting, and it also is a distraction from like maybe you've probably heard this before. We've invested in a lot of tech. Let's just start using the tech rather than investing in more tech. Like let's like get ROI out of what we have. Well, that's a very smart business decision, but that means we're not going to be on the bleeding edge anymore, which means the curves are going to start to shift again. And so I think this is why it exists. I don't know if Scott talked about this when he was on, but I think he nailed it a long time ago, and it's still true today.
thank you.
Yeah. So I'll go back. So tech, last thing I think is the problem is the operating model. I don't think we have enough flexibility in our operating model, meaning org charts, lots of headcount, lots of fixed cost, very hard to add and subtract. And there's also people affected by those adds and subtracts. When you look at every other function in the business, though, every other function in the business has a very headcount heavy, sort of tech enabled, sort of transformation mission, finance, accounting, procurement, IT, HR. Then maybe they don't have the revenue obligation that we have, but they have a lot of the same attributes in running a big team of knowledge workers. And what's interesting is all of those functions deploy the same operating model, but also the model that's very different than what we have internally. Um, those functions largely will insource very specific, very strategic things, and then outsource run work, execution work, day-to-day carrying and feeding of the function, managing invoicing and accounts payable, managing employee benefits, managing IT help desk tickets and support. And then they lean their internal resources on things that are really advanced and modern, or need to be thought of in the unique lens of the business versus the sort of expertise of the process. And marketing doesn't use that model. Marketing tends to either have a lot of internal headcount that are generalists, doing lots of different things and wearing lots of hats. And then if they do outsource something, they tend to go to an agency that brings really highly specialized skills they don't have. Marketers don't tend to look at outside resources for like the core run work of marketing. Um, and I think that's where we see some tech adoption issues. That's where we see cost issues. That's where we see flexibility issues. That's where we see headcount imbalance and program issues. And I think it drives us to a world where if we want to generate more pipeline or more revenue or more engagement or more ROI, we need more cost. And it puts a linear relationship. I need more people to do more stuff. And actually, what we need to get to is a place where less people can do more stuff. And that's what all the AI pundits are saying is possible. But I don't think anyone's really put a playbook in place of how to do that. And that's what I'm going to show you.
Yeah. So Dom, the when I'm asked to give a talk on marketing or operations at universities around Boston, um, yeah, I make proposals and I said we should talk about operating models. And the response is always, yeah, no. It's like it's not, it's not cutting edge enough. It's not interesting enough. And but it's the foundation. It's the only way that we're going to change is we have to change the model. How can we get, and then this is true also, the board meetings I sit in, the CEOs I work with, nobody wants to talk about this. Why?
Yeah, because it's hard. It's hard because it requires really reimagining the thing that worked for all of us, which is an org chart that has a product marketing function and a brand function and a field marketing and a demand gen and a marketing ops. And like we kind of know that. It's sort of like in our playbook. I think also maybe there's not an awareness of what's the better way. Maybe the point that I talked about what 2X has done in category creation. When you go to IT, take IT for example, very few people will build their own IT help desk because there are hundreds of firms out there that will do that for you, that will do it better than you can at a lower cost with technology and will move you from here to there and it's turnkey. There are not hundreds of firms that will do this for you in marketing. And so I think there's a lack of awareness of like that's even possible and how to do it. There's certainly, and I would argue, not enough being talked about in this topic in the analyst community and the sort of CMO communities around how do we drive this change? If every report I read from analysts talks about how much more tech I should buy and what the new tech is and how AI is going to solve my problems. And while that might be, interesting, there's no discussion around how do I innovate on the people side of it? Like, what do I do there? And who's done it? Let me hear from some CMOs that have done it. And so I think there's just an immaturity in our profession in that area. Most marketers as well, when we think of changing the operating model, changing the org chart, leaning into something that's more flexible, generally that involves some level of offshore delivery. Most of us have had a really bad experience with offshore. Think of that phone call we made to change a flight or to fix a credit card issue. That's not an experience that we want for our internal stakeholders and our customers. And I think a lot of firms have tried to do offshoring in a really inappropriate way for the uniqueness of marketing, communications importance, and the sanctity of the brand that we have. And so I think there's been like a lot of like reasons that in a way aren't all our fault as marketers. But I think there is a moment now where there is a model that is proven that does have some best practices. Sort of the tracks have been laid for the train to get on it now. And I think that's a moment that perhaps is now ready for us to think about
Right.
it. Here's an idea. Here's a concept that I think will play out. We know this that Forrester says that we don't have the right skills in our org to deliver the needs of the business. I think we all feel that. Um, and I think the only solve for that problem, the issues, the paradox, the tech adoption is a new operating model. And this is a concept of a new operating model that we should think about. Excuse me, the concept is on the top layer in blue, if you look at all of the work in the marketing function needs to happen, and that's all the bullet points on the page. And there could be more. This is just an example. Some of the work is work that only you can do and only you should do. That's work that is highly strategic core competency that is very unique to your business. It's work where you need to become the best in the world at it. It's things that are core to your competitive advantage and how you activate buyers and support your stakeholders and deliver the results of marketing. That's things like lots of jobs in the product marketing function. That's how you prioritize what's important and what's not. That's your top elements of customer marketing and field marketing and interacting with sales. It's overall the strategy of where you're headed and how you decide what's important. But then there's, if we're honest as marketers, then there's a lot of other work in the company that we have to do that I would argue you don't want to be unique and different on. You want to be the same as everybody else. You want to be best practice. You want to be standardized. You want to be scalable. It's how you run a campaign. It's how you manage a tech platform. It's how you build a list. It's how you manage your budgeting. It's how you run an event. It's how you produce content and collateral. It's how you do your social media. Those things, like the best practices of those are written, and there are companies that do that very well, and also people that live in the lanes of just doing that execution work and nothing else. And I think when I was a CMO, I had a view of my org, and most of us today still have this view where I'm going to take a marketer on my team and I'm going to give them both strategy work and execution work at the same time. I'm going to have them wear two hats. And what that's going to do is all of the strategies they build are going to be very rational because they're also execution. So they're not going to like build content for content's sake. They'll build content that actually gets used. If they wear both hats, it'll be very efficient. And they'll be like grounded because they'll be doing work all day. And so they won't be just in the clouds coming up with ideas. But what I found when I implemented that model in my team as a CMO was when you have to do strategy work and execution work, both get sub-optimized in interesting ways. The first is the strategy doesn't become as big as it could be. Because if you dream a big idea, you've got to execute it. So you end up dreaming only to the limits of what you can do. So your dreaming gets smaller. And that inherently headwinds the job of marketers. It's our job to innovate something that's never been done before. It's our job. The reason we all became marketers was to do something creative and special and magnificent. And when you have to execute it yourself, you're living in a much smaller dream. But then also when you have to execute it yourself, you're busy. You gotta get stuff off your desk. You got to go to the next campaign, the next planning cycle, the next sales meeting. And so are you really going to execute everything to 100% best practice? Are you really going to test every email? Are you really going to segment every list? Are you really going to build a whole nurture string for every engaged buyer and everything that you generate? Of course not. You're going to get the thing out the door and then you're going to go to the next thing. And so you end up cutting corners on execution best practices because you simply don't have the time to execute perfectly. That means execution becomes suboptimal. That means programs don't perform as much as they can. That means you can't learn every functionality in Marketo or 6sense and bring them to life. You just got to execute. And so when the same person does both of those jobs, you end up suboptimizing both. But if you think of an operating model where you split and you bifurcate the core competency work in blue that only you can do, those people become marketers again. They get to dream and be strategic and think really intently about what's uniquely going to change this business's competitive trajectory. And then the execution work in green can get run at best practice as a utility, as an outcome. You don't really care how many people are doing the work. You don't really care how much effort goes into that. You care that the outcome happened. That thing got ran at the best practice level. And that operating model difference, if you're really honest, of like, do I need to do this? And am I the best in the world at this? And should I be the one doing this or should somebody else be the one doing this? Changes how you think about the work.
So Dom, this is a powerful slide. Um, it's a very, very different type of slide. And the other thing, what's implied here, and I've got a bunch of questions I want to get to here because people are reacting to this. It's even if you had this with your old model, you had your Marketo expert in house, and then she leaves. Okay, and then all of a sudden you're toast. So there's a vulnerability there. But a couple questions are coming in, and let me get them looking at, Doug's asking, looking to our future, is there any room in this org chart for entry level or junior level? Is there, how do we, is there an element that we build in, Doug, if I can translate it, is there also an element that we can build in house?
Yeah, I think that's a real issue because if you bring in entry level or junior level skills from people that really don't know anything, they're fresh out of school, that work is going to be less good than someone that's been doing that work their whole career and is a senior email marketing ops person, for example. I would argue, I think the best way, and this gets to like sort of global labor trends, I think entry level talent is best sent into a place that has an awesome training program, that has a great structure, that can package, the kind of the the apprentice model, package someone with a senior person and teach that individual. And I think a lot of marketing departments don't have that. And so I think junior talent should probably be into the service provider ecosystem first, learn the business or agency, learn how to deliver marketing really well. And then that creates the revolving door into leadership roles sort of inside companies. I think there could be some examples. Like I do think PDRs are a great example of sort of junior salespeople. And I think there could be a case made that you have a BDR function comes in and that sort of teaches people how to prospect and then they become sales reps. So you kind of need like the Cub Scouts or the Boy Scouts, if you will. You need that kind of program. I think in a lot of marketing roles, though, I think it's a good thing to do to educate the next generation. But I think as your job as a marketer, you're here to produce output and results. And if you have someone fresh out of school doing something, they're going to be less productive than someone that's been doing it for 10 years.
Yeah, great point. I took some grief for this, but I used to have junior marketers coming in. I used to have them spend between 2 weeks and a month in two areas. One was in, inside sales, and the other was in tech support. And they were groomed. At least they had concepts so they could, get there. So, question came in from Rachel. This is a good one too. It's this whole thing. We're dealing now with the world of fractional CMOs. Okay, so nobody wants to spend for a CMO anymore, and they want it part-time. How does, this whole insourcing strategic jive with hiring fractional CMOs?
I think fractionals play a great role in businesses that can't afford a full time and aren't ready for a full time. But I think when the company gets to that size and scale, you want a full-time CMO. I think it's in the same way you wouldn't have a fractional CRO, you wouldn't have a fractional CFO, you wouldn't have a fractional head of HR if you were a business that had significant size and scale. And so I think fractionals are a bridge, in my view. I think they play a very important role that and a lot of I can talk about my peers now, the CEOs. A lot of CEOs don't understand marketing. They have no idea what marketing is, how it delivers results. And so a fractional, I think, can be an advisor, a therapist, a consultant to the CEO to help them figure out how to get marketing moving in the right direction. But I think once it's in that state, you should have, I think, a permanent leader to oversee it and to bring it to the next level.
Yeah. And one more question on this slide. This is generating a lot of
Yeah.
responses from Will. It's outsourcing can happen for any role. Talking about adding a bandwidth and skills, but carving up outsourcing budget for marketing is not something CEOs want to see. How are you getting over that hump, and what do you see, convincing the CEO or even some of the board members, if it's a smaller company, the board has more control. How do you get over the hump saying, hey, we're going to outsource this particular facet of marketing?
It's interesting. Most of our clients are private equity firms, and we deploy this strategy deeply through PE organizations. We also work with some big enterprises as well. They're public companies. But I think this is a board level conversation. It's a CEO level conversation more than the conversation marketing normally has. And I think maybe if there's an opposition to it, there's a belief that it's lower quality, or a belief that it's loss of control, or a belief that it's not going to produce as much. Maybe I'll just move to I think this answers it. This is the outcome of doing this really well. And I think it's the most CEO friendly message you could have as a marketer. This is a client of ours who adopted this new operating model with a marketing as a service component to it. If you look on Blue, that's their life before. They have a marketing budget that's reasonable. They're producing ROI and revenue. They know their conversion rates, and they're actually not bad. Like Blue, most of us would be happy to have Blue in our marketing functions. They weren't satisfied with that. They shifted half of their organization into green and orange. Orange I didn't talk about in the last slide, but that's AI and automation. They really leaned into the tech stack and said, we're going to use all of the tech to its fullest potential. And they also pulled in a lot of agency spend, which was high cost, and brought it into an insourced model where they had dedicated people working on it. Those people happened to be offshore, but they were still dedicated people. So they functioned more like internal marketers than like a pool of agency experts. That cut their budget in half, and it doubled the contribution to revenue, and it changed their velocity, and it made them more flexible, and it improved ROI. And I think the unit cost economics of this, now what it did was it took what was fixed cost headcount. Most organizations, about 60% of your marketing budgets in fixed cost headcount. It moved most of that into now a variable cost program spend like factor. That's a big element for CEOs and boards and CFOs, and now we turn our labor into a utility like cloud spend, if you will. You can take it up, you can take it down, or more like program spend. And so now your labor can float with your program dollars, so you can have flexibility there. But on a unit basis, the individual work might be 70% less per unit of hour or unit of person. And with that, in this world, they wanted to save $8 million. They could have held the 16 million flat and generated 200 million in revenue. In their world, they wanted to take some savings and some revenue. But that kind of optionality, that kind of magnitude of results is, I think, how CEOs, boards, private equity firms, CFOs understand the value of this model. And by the way, this is the same model that they all use in every other area. Your CFO is outsourcing half of their work generally. Your head of HR, your head of procurement, your IT person is probably outsourcing 80% of their work. And they're doing it in this way because of these economics. And I think if you can find someone who's really high quality, who understands the tech better than you do, who understands the execution lanes and AI better than you do, then it's a lift in impact at the same time as a reduction in cost.
This is interesting, just more of a comment. I think in the CEOs I work with, what they've seen with their marketing organizations, where there's been heavy outsourcing, has always been, and this is changing obviously,
So
has been around SEO. And and I'm going to offend some people here, but you could argue that I would say 95% of outsourced SEO has been an abject failure. And so I think there's a bit of the SEO failure hangover. Whereas what I like about this is we're taking a different approach. We're actually focusing on numbers, and you're also quantifying things here. Are you saying that in order to do this, you have to have your hands around, you know, I would say quantitative measures on your existing operating model? Is that the best way to communicate this?
it is, yeah, because I think, and by the way, in blue, most marketers can articulate this level of simplicity on the ROI of marketing. And so I think you have to have that. And I think there's an element of really understanding the ROI of marketing and the contribution of marketing, and then working on can we make that better. And this is where I think back to the point about fractionals. This is the kind of stuff that fractionals can help bridge the gap on of like, where is our baseline? Where is our current state? What does it cost us to generate pipeline? How much pipeline do we have, and do we have enough? You got to get to that sort of fundamental understanding of like what exists inside of this function. I think of the maturity of a marketing function, and I think it's very different at the size of company. You kind of go through this phase where it's sort of a founder-led business at one point, and then it becomes sort of a sustainably scalable business, and then it becomes a business that is sort of an enterprise size. It's a very simple way to look at it. But in the transition from the founder phase to the scale beyond the founder phase, in that world, I think inefficiency is okay. It's actually what's going to happen because your close rates are going to go down. Your ROI is going to go down in most things because you're building a function that actually didn't exist before. And mission one is to get sales and marketing live. That's the mission. And then once it's live, then make it more efficient. I think a lot of folks go to, I need to get it ultra efficient out of the gate. And I think that's the wrong way to look at it. That causes you to make the problem so much harder than it has to be. I think as you're getting marketing running, the fact that it's on and the fact that it's delivering pipeline and revenue, and you can see that pipeline and revenue, massive success moment. And the second moment is how do we get more for less? How do we get better unit cost economics? And I think we've got to look at what problem are we solving. I think it's very rare to go to a hyper efficient, fully best in class model first. I think you got to get it running first. Any other questions, Rob?
Yeah, this are they're they're piling.
I'm glad you're looking at the chat because that was on the slide. So I'm glad you said.
Yeah, there was we probably had 10 questions come in. I'm trying to as I filter these. A question from Alan about, again, it gets back to the the CEO, and I'm trying to reconcile a couple questions. Getting the CEOs to understand this. We touched upon it briefly, but especially as you're working in your world, you're working with a lot of PE firms. So there's the turnaround. So the PE firms seem to understand something that many CEOs don't. So as I pull these questions and reconcile them, why is that?
It's a good question. Really good question. I think the the PE firms, this I've talked to enough. I think PE firms actually genuinely believe in the value of marketing. They may not like how much it costs, and you'll see them go after the spend, but they know that brands that are magical and special have higher valuations than those that no one's heard of. They know that. And they know that cold calling and salespeople just out there hunting on the street alone is not a successful growth strategy. And so I think they believe in kind of the balanced nature of like we need these functions to all exist in a business and need to be performing. I think a lot of CEOs don't really understand marketing, and they think it's just like another version of a sales team. It's just like I'll just get more pipeline out of that. And I think also it's sort of, and I've talked to enough CEOs or CFOs as well. The CFOs don't really understand as well, like the black box, like money goes in and like results pop out, and like how that stuff in the middle actually works. And I think that causes them to say, I'm just going to like hire a great marketer and trust them. And every marketer I've ever met has said, I need to rebrand the company and hire a big org. And that's what they're informed by. I don't think they've seen next gen operating models. I don't think they've often seen really deeply sophisticated revenue marketers in their orbit. And so I think they're just informed by their own experiences.
Yep.
And I don't think that means they're deficient. I think it means they need to be educated by a marketer to say, like Lisa, the CMO in this story here, Lisa brought this model to the business. The business didn't ask for it. And when she brought it to the business, she was telling me a story where she was sitting around at an executive meeting, and the CFO was saying to all the other functional leaders, the head of IT, the head of HR, the head of operations, like, why have you guys not thought of your operating model like this? Because marketing is the hardest thing to change. And Lisa changed it. Look at the results. And therefore, you should think about your operating model in this way and lean into the thing that you want to be really great at and buy expertise from elsewhere where you want the outcome of it. And so I think there's a bit of an education journey in how marketing could evolve. And I think it's important I think our job as a marketer is to be the counselor to the CEO and the educator to the CEO and not just wait for the CEO to tell you to do something. That's really bad if you're in that position. I think you've got to come with the new idea. And we know this as marketers. Every year we got to show up at the sales QBR and come up with a new idea, right? Sales wants some new thing. And if we said, hey, I'm going to double my program budget next year without doubling my overall budget next year, that's a really powerful idea. And I'm going to do that because I'm going to cut my headcount spend and I'm going to shift the headcount spend into program, and I'm going to ramp up my program dollars so I can deliver more campaigns and events and programs. That only that idea can only come from the marketer, I believe.
All right. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah. So let me maybe dive one click deeper on this. I think that marketing in the operating model context, marketing is basically a professional services company. We as marketers have lots of people, lots of knowledge workers, and I think we can learn a lot from how professional services businesses operate. And this is just an example. I'll tell you about that. And I think if we start running marketing like how professional services companies run, we come up with lots of different ideas on the operating model. And so this is a very sort of simplified creative operating model. But this is what it would look like if you're running creative in your marketing function, the way a creative agency would run. This is how you would run that marketing team. You would have groups that provide demand, different stakeholders, different functions, different groups that need something from marketing. You'd have a ticketing system that manages your work, that has an intake form, that has SLAs, that has really clear responsibilities and where things go. You'd have a team of account managers that make sure that job gets executed on behalf of the stakeholder. You'd have communities of craft where you have expertise with a reasonable span of control of management and agents to bolster the productivity of that. You would have an operations function that has things like managing your utilization of all the resources, figuring out what everybody's working on all day, learning your unit cost economics, knowing if you have enough capacity for next month versus the last month, being able to inform how much work do we need to do and do we have capability to do that work. being able to constantly work on how do I reduce the number of iterations on a job? How do I reduce the number of cycles? How do I put a template in so the work gets faster? How do I improve the feedback of the stakeholder? How do I reduce the friction? You'd have sort of a function trying to make you more efficient, generate more margin, if you will, as a professional service company, or generate more leverage if you are as a marketer. Um, and then you'd have a whole bunch of technology underneath that and AI tools, and you'd be measuring the effect of productivity of that. Because this model, as a professional services firm, is how you generate revenue, how you generate results, how you generate profit. Um, as a creative leader, this is the model you should probably have some version of. I would argue it's really hard for a creative leader to build this whole model internally. But if you had everything from green on down, fulfilled with offshore resources that understand these areas, that come with the technology and the best practices, everything from green on down could cost 70% less than you pay today with your full-time onshore generalist or your agency that's providing kind of a pool of services that you can poke them when you need a new creative asset. Um, this kind of thinking of like, how do I run this more efficiently? How do I really understand how work gets done? How do I understand uh, how much capacity I have? How do I understand what everyone's doing all day? That's a big thing that marketers, I think, struggle with, and I struggled with it when I was a CMO. We don't really track time in most marketing departments. There's a lot of reasons why our employees won't let us get away with that. But if we knew what everybody was doing all day, we'd be able to optimize their work. Hey, they're doing things that aren't that high value, or they're spending a huge amount of time on something that we didn't realize was taking them that long, or they're not busy at all some days. Those things, if we knew that, we would, and professional services firms have to know that because it's their business. So they know what everyone does and they try to get the most value out of an hour or a unit of labor. I think marketing functions could run that way. And if they did, they'd get more productivity and they'd have the metrics and the operational hygiene to be able to put more output at the top. Here's an example of some things I mean in there. Do we really have intake forms, briefs? Do we really understand what someone wants when they want something? A lot of marketers translate that all day, right? I've seen some horrible briefs, we all have. But I think as marketers, we got to lead the organization to be better articulate of what they want. Do we know how long things take? Like part of it, I think the root of how we get misaligned from sales is sales thinks it's going to take 5 minutes, so we think it's going to take 5 days. And then there's this like conflict of you're not fast enough, you're not doing enough. If we actually wrote down like how long things are going to take, and we knew that, and we had SLAs, like do we know how many hours it takes to produce something? Do we know if that's getting better or worse? Do we know that it used to take us 4 hours to write an ebook, and now it takes us 2 hours to write it because we use AI? Do we know that? Does that mean we then could have half as many resources? Maybe. Or I prefer we can do twice as much work, which is usually the problem that most of us face. Do we know how utilized our people are? How much time they're spending? Do we have people in our marketing orgs that are running at 130% utilization? That's really bad. That means they're going to quit. They're going to burn out. Are we able to protect their time and give them the balance they deserve? And then are we able to make sure that we're load balancing? Do we know how much capacity we need next month? We certainly could know how much capacity we have today and what we're doing today. Do we have a forward forecast of how much, based on the campaign strategy, based on the sales plan, based on the seasonality time of the year? Q4 is big in events, Q1 is big in campaign launches, whatever those things are. Do we know how much capacity we need in marketing? And are we floating our capacity to match our demand? Or are we just always out of balance because we always have either too many people or not enough people, and we never have the right balance of productivity? Do we know what our team really thinks of us? Do we ask them for feedback in sort of a non, executive forum QBR way? Like, how'd that campaign go? How'd that lead go? How did that event go? Do we get that feedback? Do we process it and do we use it to get better? These are all the kind of things that if you were running marketing like a professional services firm, you would do. And I think the kind of things that go into an operating model change that looks like it's more people, and it is. But it actually costs less if you're using global labor to deliver it. Any other questions, comments, chat in the chat, Rob?
So far, so good. We're gonna let
Yeah.
you run it out, and then we'll hit you with some more questions.
Yeah, so that was really the gist of it. Those were the ideas. Um, I'll put my LinkedIn in the chat. Always happy to connect. Happy to send you the slides. Happy to be a thought partner for you. as you navigate this. But I believe that the unlock in how we solve the resource paradox, the tech adoption, the credibility in the boardroom, the cost work and balance, the AI value, is to think about the operating model, think about the people, think about all the headcount, and think about a better way to do it. And a better model that gives you all of the output you want at a lower cost, with more focus to actually go and be a marketer again and go work on the brand and go innovate and go dream a bigger dream for your company. And what we've built at 2X is a business that helps people do that. We have consulting services to help take you through an organizational redesign. We have some great consultants, former CMOs, people that we've pulled out of Forrester. And then we've done this for over 200 companies where we've helped them kind of navigate the here to there, and through that deliver huge cost savings and then huge improvements in output in the process.
All right, Dom, terrific. The takeaways here, and then we'll hit some questions. Obviously, addressing the unsexy model, but I think to your point, um, and this is harsh, but a lot of CMOs don't know how to measure their business. Having been both a CMO and a head of sales, sales is easy. It's a number, at the end of the day. And I think that's what CEOs understand. So getting their hands around that's going to be critical. But I posted a link in the chat. David Maister, who's a big professional services firm guy. Interesting book. It's a little bit dated now, but your point about professional services is critical. The problem that I've had with my teams, it's like, well, Joe from sales called me up and he got a customer objection and he wanted a piece of collateral to address the objection. If anybody on this call hasn't gotten that request, raise your hand. And so what happens is we don't, even internally as marketers, we don't qualify what just came in. Okay, what were they asking? What was the context? It goes back to your comment about professional services firms. So we have to start thinking that way. And I think the challenge is not just attack the operating model, but start thinking like a professional services firm. And I like your breakdown into what we're doing with agents and what's core and then what we're outsourcing. So a question came in about, let's look at the overall structure. The trend that I see, and I've analyzed over 300 companies for the work that I do. Your comment about CEOs not understanding marketing, I would say that's true in 80% of the companies where I have analyzed marketing problems. And sometimes my job is to educate the CEO on understanding what's there. But the other trend I see, and this was brought up as one of the questions, we're starting to see marketing move from a C-level position to maybe it's a C-level position reporting to the chief revenue officer. How does that impact what you're talking about here?
So many thoughts about that. I think it's the wrong decision in a lot of cases. I think it's a result of CEOs just not knowing what to do with marketing, so being okay with it be a level removed from them. And I think it's also a factor of CROs having a strong opinion of what they want, which is more pipeline, and them saying, and CROs tend to have a lot of power in the exec team saying, like, I will be able to aim marketing at more pipeline if I own it. Here's the problem. I think we all were sold the bill of goods that if a CRO is running sales and marketing, that they're both an expert of sales and an expert of marketing, and they're able to unify and run those functions. And I think if you find a CRO who is both expert in sales and expert in marketing, I think it's totally cool if they run sales and marketing. Problem is 99% of CROs are former heads of sales that don't know anything about marketing. And there's a couple that we've all met in the world that have made that CMO to CRO transition, so few that we know them all. And so I think that's a problem. And I think it's as a CEO. Now I'm obviously biased because I was a CMO and I run a marketing services firm and a go-to-market services firm. But I think the marketer is your best advisor. They're the only person in the room that really sees the whole customer life cycle. They know what the market's talking about. They know what customers want. They know what competitors are saying. They know how you're generating engagement and results, and they know how that's performing in terms of is it profitable or not. That's the person you should listen to the most. And I've told CEOs that. Now, if you don't have a marketer to speak that language, you probably have the wrong CMO. But listening to your marketer tell you about, what's going on in LLM search trends around your brand, that is like a highly strategic conversation you should have. And I think as the CMOs, CEOs are kind of given up and said, well, the CRO can handle it because I can't see my way through this. And so I think that's going to change. And I think also really, really good CMOs, the ones that understand how to talk in a boardroom, that understand that whole life cycle I went through from brand all the way to the revenue and EBITDA and valuation, they're not going to work for CRO.
No.
And so I think those great CMOs are going to mandate a CEO connection. So I think, I don't know, I think this is kind of a phase that we're going to grow out of. I think it's unfortunate that a lot of CMOs have been put in that position. I think it's a moment, maybe if you are in that position, not to like despair and all is lost, to become that advisor to the CRO. And then through that, create change and transformation in the business, and then that's the path back to the CEO and the boardroom. But I think marketers need to be on the exec team in an equal role to other executives.
Yeah. Dom, this is great. We're gonna finish up with one request or comment for you. Don't worry, it's not a curveball. So in 5 minutes, people will be off this call and they'll be going back to their day jobs, their consulting jobs, their professional services firms, their agencies. What should they do in 5 minutes after listening to you?
Yeah, I would have a quiet moment and I would think about all the resources you control and look at what you pay them and look at what their output is and ask yourself really honestly, do I need to be paying 160 grand fully burdened per year for this resource? Or would I rather have three of them for the same price? And if I had three of them for the same price, what could I do differently? And ask that question, wrestle with that. Lots of emotions come from that. But if you start to think about your organ that way, or maybe you have two of them and you give 30% back to the business so they stop asking you to cut your budget. Um, Look at the org that way and let it lead you to different decisions around how you get work done. And I think through that is how you actually produce more output.
Yeah, that's a fair point. So, Dom, thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Pam. Um, even and I work on this day to day, but what you presented is thought provoking. And I think we really have to do something very, very differently. The comments have been fabulous. So clearly, nothing better than an engaged audience. So you folks have Dom's contact information. We'll have the video there. And so, Pam, I'm going to turn it back over to you. And big thanks on this, Dom. So Pam's going to talk about what's next.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Rob. And thank you, Dom. You've given us a lot to think about. And we think about the people side of things, which kind of came out in the chat as well. There's aspects of that, but I will definitely be reflecting on this as I think about what I'm doing, work with some of my clients this week. As Rob said, the recording will be available next week in the meetup. So if you've registered for this session, you will get the link. I do think this may be one you want to review again, think about further. We have one more Sammy session in 2025 before the holidays. I can't believe I'm talking about the holidays, but we have another session on a special day and time on Tuesday, November 18th at noon Eastern to accommodate a pair of speakers from the West Coast. And the session is called From Lead to Loyalty, How Data Lakes Supercharge Sales and Marketing. So this is going to be a data-driven one. I think there's obviously some parallels to what Don was talking about today and upping your game with systems and making the use of your data and systems. The two speakers, Adam Eidson and Adele Grog, and they're going to just talk about this intersection of marketing, data, science, sales execution. That session is open for registration. And before we wrap, I am just going to throw the registration link right here in chat. So if you haven't already signed up for that, you can go ahead and sign up. And with that, we will let you wrap up and get on with the rest of your Thursday and the rest, or your Wednesday, right? I'm so used to it being Thursday. The rest of your Wednesday and the rest of your week. Thank you guys so much for being here today. We'll see you in November.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Pam. Thanks, Dom. Bye bye.